leveling up. The Tories are at least meant to be one of the big flagship policies of the current Tory party, that they are leveling up the country, that no country is being left behind. But the reality, unfortunately, could not be further from the truth. We have had recently the report into leveling up, the fact that most of these projects, first of all, just aren't done, are going to come in massively over cost, or in some cases, some councils ended up having to give a lot of this money back because inflation was spiraling some of the costs of these projects, and what they'd originally quoted to do this was now just not the case. So they ended up having to hand money back, and yet every single time we come back to this, and we always talk about this, the whole leveling up fund, this shared prosperity fund, the way it is set up, the way it is done, is completely and absolutely ridiculous. The idea that everyone and all these councils who need the money now have to not only compete with each other, but spend money to get people to apply for these projects, which then they don't end up getting, and then they've spent all this money on someone because, again, they need that resource in the council to be able to sort of apply and go for this funding. It's a lot of effort to go through these sort of funding procedures to get this money and to sort of justify this. Hey, this is why we need this money. So it is just constantly just not going to work, and we have seen some of these projects be like these one-off bizarre vanity projects that, while okay, great, I'm glad that has been done and a thing, but then what about long-term projects, or projects that need consistent funding over a number of years to help things and places be developed? Bear in mind, my own hometown currently is, through its own sort of funding, it built a war chest, very much so, for over the past sort of couple of years, and is now really sort of spending that money into sort of expanding the infrastructure of the town and helping to sort of bring more business sort of elements now into the town as well, with sort of what they're building, and sort of incorporating into this infrastructure. um they ain't doing that without a single bit of government help. And yeah, they've gone to the government a number of times, said, "Oh yeah, we're doing this. We help fund it." And they go, "Yeah, maybe, maybe." But there you go. So yeah, I want to get into this because I think this is being put across actually quite right. This comes from a conservative home, and the title is "Blackpool South should be the poster child for leveling up, but will the forthcoming by-election reflect that?" So, obviously, as we said, we know that a by-election coming from Blackpool South. And here's the thing. Yes, Blackpool South is the exact poster child for leveling up, because it exemplifies every single failure that the leveling up department, that the funding, the way that it is being structured, has become an absolute failure and a joke. And that, no, all this money that the Blackpool's going to get for it, yeah, I'm sure there are going to be many people who go, "Oh yeah, excellent, we've got some money, we've got this and this and this." But over the long term, it's just not going to happen. And bear in mind, Germany is in itself constantly going through this, when of course reunification happened and the realization that, oh, actually the East needs this massive sort of constant series of development going into the East to be able to sort of, even bring it up to the level. And one of the things you've seen in Germany is that, even though the West and the East were at very, very different levels, the West has just continued to build, but the East is still very, very much struggling even to sort of catch up to that. But they are, again, we've had this conversation before. Germans in the chat will agree, disagreed, and sort of give their various opinions to sort of how that is doing. But I will always say this: if it was our government doing this, East Germany would be nowhere near the level that it is now. You know, thank your lucky stars, you've actually got a government that actually cares seriously about leveling up your country. So before we do go into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. Of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, the one donation link where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course there is the Pony Club as well down below. And of course, do remember just to click on the like and share button. And of course, if you're new to the channel, click the subscribe button. So let's go on into this and find out why Blackpool North should be. Although we'll see why in a moment. So James Ford here, kind of interesting because he was a policy advisor to Boris Johnson back during the Mayor of London days. So we'll see what his sort of thinking about this actually is. So it starts. So at first glance, the omens for the forthcoming Blackpool South by-election are very ominous for the government. The seat, which was now held successively by the Labour Party at 6 general elections between 1997 to 2017, only narrowly turned to the Conservative fold back in 2019, with a very narrow majority of at least 3,690. Given Labour's mammoth poll lead, the by-election scheduled for May the 2nd should be a cakewalk for the opposition. Oh, it's going to be probably more than that, given the case of what's going on here, and we'll find out in a moment, because it actually does bring up a good point that if they are leveling up, that they have done this, then why not talk about it more? Why not be singing the success stories of this? Well, that's because if you go to these places, if you talk to people, you talk about the leveling up money, it doesn't really feel like any of this stuff. It doesn't really feel like any of this promised help would finally come. And some of this stuff is just like, there you go. And that's it. you know. And we'll see some of these in a moment. But whilst Blackpool South may be a marginal seat enduring a by-election under a very dark cloud of scandal, it is also a case study for showing how levelling up can work. The seaside town, very long neglected and left behind by the last Labour government, has now, again, I would disagree with that, has been benefited from a very enormous amount of investment under this government. And in recent years, key projects have included. So again, remember some of these. Some of these stuff is literally, there you go. And then it's like, okay, but we need this, maybe a bit more to this. Some of this stuff is not going to be the great deliverer and savior, the leveling up of Blackpool that was promised by a number of people. It is not that sustained level of development in this. But here we go. So the first one, nearly £40 million by the government in 2021, which is providing over £9 million worth of support for a multiversity, a carbon-neutral education campus, nearly £700 million to kick off the Blackpool Central, £300 million private sector-led redevelopment sectors of Blackpool seafront to create over 1,000 jobs and attract over 600,000 additional visitors to the town, £7.5 million in further funding for the Blackpool Airport Enterprise Zone, which started back in 2016, has already attracted at least 145 new businesses, created over 2,500 jobs, 6.5 million for the Rove Community Support Centre, 5.4 million for the new office space in the town centre, 5.5 million to modernise the iconic Blackpool illuminations, and 0.5 million for a new youth hub. Now, again, some of these projects, excellent. Okay, glad you got them. But where is the sustained funding? Okay, you've got a brand new office block in Blackpool town centre. What are you going to do to help bring those businesses into that town centre? What are you going to do to help, make sure that those businesses, once they do get in there, how are they going to help to survive? What are they going to do? What there's so many other questions that is just thrown at this. And yeah, that's a lot of stuff. But the reality is, if you were to sort of break some of these down, the reality is it's no. It's what I said from the very beginning. It's they've said the words leveling up, and now they can't actually commit to properly leveling up, but they've done stuff which to them looks like leveling up, which is pretty much if you build it, they will come, which is not a very good business proposition, you know. Um, so on to the next one. So, a 350 million Talbot Gateway regeneration project, which will create over a new 144 room four-star hotel with a Marco Pierre white restaurant, a civil service hub, and a major expansion to the town's iconic tramway. Excellent. As I said, a lot of this stuff we're probably going to talk about, very much needed. Great if you can get, the tramway extended, trams and sort of public transport, very, very good. Do have a massive sort of and should have been part of the the leveling up process, but again, not even thought about in their ideas. Um, a strategic leveling up partnership of over 400 million, plus a further 90 million committed to improving housing provision. The Silicon Sands plans for a new technology park and digital campus to attract firms specializing in robotics, gaming, and AI to the town, made possible by the new arrival of the fiber gigabit broadband and the Blackpool's connection to the North Atlantic Loop back in 2020, and 1.3 million funding of DCMS to try and expand a full fiber network. Um, Again, congratulations, you've got that. But it's will the project bear fruit? Will it be turn out to have borne any, actual good fruit? And I think that is anything that anyone would ask. Is this going to be a good project? Ultimately, I can guarantee you there will be someone from Blackpool come and say, "Oh no, you don't understand. That's going to be a great project." Good, excellent, but but what about the long term stuff for that center, for these places? That is what we are not seeing. It is just, there you go, build it. We'll move on to someone else. There you go, build it and move on to someone else. It is just bits and pieces. It is drops in a bucket. It is drops in a bucket that should have um, been done under 14 years of Tory government, and yet all of a sudden you've seen all this stuff for the last couple of years. Why has this not been a sustained level? Oh, might it be perhaps because for a lot of this time, this was under a Labour a Labour councillor, and you didn't want to really give stuff to this because we saw this going all the way back to Cameron Osborne's Northern Powerhouse with Tory MPs in the South complaining, why are we giving taxpayers money to level up constituencies which aren't controlled by conservatives, by Tories. But you sort of have to. This is one of the big things that needs to be get across, that all this southern area that is incredibly wealthy, that has benefited for years for leveling up, and not everywhere in the south, bear in mind, is like that. Let's also stress that. Um, but that money now needs to sort of get moved up north to be sort of focused on up in the north to sort of catch up to the level of the south. Because if not, it creates very, very big economic problems. Um, so anyway, back to this. So anyway, it should become very clear from this larger list of government largesse that the Blackpool has now been one of the biggest winners for the government and the leveling up agenda. Will it though? And why now of all things? The big criticism that was absolutely true when it was labeled at leveling up. Blackpool managed to get all this stuff because just happened to go Tory this time. So have many of these towns that have been crying out for this type of development. And yet all this stuff suddenly came now because you got a Tory MP. If they really did care about leveling up and winning people's votes and getting people to sort of vote for them in the next election, then you should level up areas and go to areas and focus on areas regardless of what their voting prospects are. But there you go. Um, so anyway, he continues. Anyway, this commitment to investing in areas had now been previously very much neglected, marginalized, and overlooked by past governments is not just creating jobs, boosting business and home improvements, but is also transforming lives. Excellent. Great. Why weren't you doing this right from the get-go, though? And they weren't. They weren't doing this from the get-go. Even the actual, leveling up, money and funding doesn't go anywhere beyond, very quick, instant, quick win projects. When in reality, to really achieve leveling up, you need some long-term products. You need to look at long-term sort of infrastructure planning, public transport planning, a lot of stuff that should be going into sort of thinking about how we achieve leveling up. And that has not been thought about. It has been very much quickly, what projects can we get out as quickly as possible before the next election and say we can level it up. And then, of course, you can say, oh, look how fantastic we were at leveling up. And then meanwhile, after that, you can quietly then forget about the whole thing. Like I say, the whole issues, the whole thing about, again, the whole leveling up, are very, very clear that it was never intended to be a long-term project, a long-term office, a long-term sort of plan for actually, improving the UK. It was pork barrel politics at its most obvious and blatant uh, in this case here. But again, if you have benefited from this and your town has got that money, great. But even then, what is that project or that building or that sort of investment going to be like 5, 10 years from now? You know, with that office space in he mentioned in Blackpool. What if in I don't know 6 years time it gets turned into a block of flats because turns out they didn't actually do anything to bring businesses into those office blocks or those flats. Wouldn't be the first time that's happened. Anyway, just as importantly, there is now no sign that Blackpool's appetite for government funding is now going to end anywhere anytime soon. Everywhere is wanting government funding. Everywhere is wanting it. So why not properly do this in a way that it goes to the places that need it most first and get those areas done first, the areas that that do it by need, as we used to do when we were in the EU, and make sure that those places get prominently, leveled up first, and then you can, you know, go out. But it's not like those other areas wouldn't get money either. They probably get less money, but then again, they don't need as much money. And then other areas that are far more, affluent in this case, like, as Rishi Sunak infamously said, like Richmond, Richmond didn't need any leveling up because it really just didn't need it. It was not a case where it was needed. But there you go. Like I say, leveling up. Anyway, so Blackpool's Pride of Placement Partnership, a very local coalition of public, private, and voluntary groups, recently published a new ambitious prospectus for investment that will create over 110,000 jobs and create and add over 1 billion to local economy by 2030. This by-election should be seen as an opportunity for the government to try and bang the drum about the tangible, real-world achievements of levelling up. Local Conservatives do have a great opportunity to tell a very positive story of change and renewal on the doorsteps. Um, the reality is that those Conservatives on the doorstep, when they say things like this, oh, look, you got a Conservative in. Look at all this stuff you got. Wouldn't it be a shame if you were to vote out your local Conservative and lose all that infrastructure? That's not a story. That's a mafia offer. That is a mafia offer. Shame if you were to get, a Labour MP, then we'd have to stop all this leveling up. It is just the type of really bad sort of selling about this. And yet we know what leveling up was actually needed because they actually did a whole white paper, the leveling up white paper, and we've talked about this multiple times. The first two chapters got exactly what leveling up needed to be, what it needed to do, the amount of money, funds, and long term investment it had to do to properly achieve that aim of leveling up. But when it came to the Treasury, which again Rishi Sunak was in charge of, that money was not forthcoming. And it was but a tiny drop in the ocean of what was needed. So, what we're going to end up in this conservative legacy of leveling up is that there are going to be buildings and things that go up. But the reality is that the long term um, objective, the funding of these places, isn't exactly going to be a potentially a big success story. Now, some of them are going to have, good legacies. Some of them are, but not all of them. Some are destined to be very, very bizarre. Just like the Northern Powerhouse, where if you go to Leeds train station and you know the back end exit to Leeds train station, that is one of the very, very few things that the Northern Powerhouse, Cameron or George Osborne's attempt to level up the country, that just achieved that. And okay, great, you've got an exit, which barely anyone uses, honestly. Um, but there you go. Yeah, it's going to be a bizarre legacy like that, honestly, and not many people are going to really positively attach it to sort of the Tories, honestly. But there you go. Anyway, ministers should be descending on the seat in great numbers. Again, that's very much likely going to happen to visit all these many projects that their funding and support is now delivering. Well, just look at the recent report about leveling up. Um, yeah, me thinks some of these things that he's mentioned maybe haven't been built yet, or even started to be built. But there you go. Rather than the usual photo opportunity of eating ice cream on the promenade, campaigning politicians can visit the newly opened Showtown Museum or even the IMAX Cinema Complex, tour the over 10 million Lancashire Energy HQ, or even walk the 3.2 kilometres of new seawall between the Sandcastle and North Pier. Basic infrastructure and development you should probably expect to see from any normal government. But there you go. Anyway, let's finish this off. So, other Conservative seats that have been lost very recently in by-elections may have been and had even bigger majorities, but they will have been on the receiving end of very much less Whitehall benefiction. This type of campaign that should be waged in Blackpool South over the next 2 weeks will be a sign of the party leadership's confidence, and an energetic, positive campaign may yet yield positive results that could even serve as a template for a forthcoming general election. So, again, when you've had such a bad, and I mean bad, report about the actual state of leveling up, that it hasn't achieved its aims, that projects haven't even been started, funded, or underfunded in some cases, with councils having to give back leveling up money. Just, what can you say? Yeah, Blackpool South is a poster child for leveling up because it is the exact poster child for every single criticism people have talked about the criticisms and leveling against the government, for its lack of ambition, for its lack of ability, for its lack of long-term planning to even build in sort of public transport ideas or infrastructure ideas into the idea of leveling up, and instead very, very much relying on um, very much private led investment. And sometimes, yes, you are going to get that private investment, but where's it going to go and where's it going to be unless there isn't sort of government backing up on this? And I always do and would say that the government can and is easily one of the biggest and best economic developers in the world, and we have seen that multiple examples, not only here in the UK but around the world, that where the government leads, private enterprises do sort of tend to sort of money does tend to flow and follow. um But yeah, we'll see what happens in this election. Um, but I highly doubt this is going to be quote the poster child for leveling up, because if you go look how fantastic Blackpool is, then every single other town that either A did not receive any leveling up money, but was much needed will say, well, why did we not receive, this type of funding? You're going to get other towns that are going to go, well, actually, we got that leveling up funding, but there's nothing to show for it. And some of the projects that were even mentioned very recently aren't even going to have that big an impact. So while some of these projects, I'm sure people from Blackpool will tell us in the chat that some of these projects, yes, are good. I will agree. Yes, some of these projects are good, excellent, great. The long term sort of initiative, the long termism that and the planning that and sort of the future of those, like say that office block in the center of Blackpool, that shall we say probably will get turned into a will probably get turned into flats in the not too distant future. Unfortunately, because again, there was no long term planning put into why they should build, an office block in the center of Blackpool. What did they need the office space in the center of Blackpool? If they did, great, excellent. But now, what are you going to do to sort of fill those office blocks? Yeah. Anyway, so as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.